Let's Bet It by Superbook Sports. Good afternoon, everyone. And those on the East Coast, good morning to you. With Mark Zitto, I'm David Gascon. Thanks for joining us today. Mark, you look a little bit different. And rumor around town is you took a deep dive over the shallow end of the pool with one thing and one thing only, TikTok. Before we get into
Yeah.
5 games in the SEC, what the hell is going on with you?
I have to say that TikTok is one of the more difficult challenges I've encountered in my life. I highly don't recommend it unless you're 13. It was way over my head. It was way past my scope of understanding. I actually had to call people and FaceTime and share a screen to understand what the hell I was doing. Look, I'm putting together some more content on my TikTok page at Mark Zeno, same as my Twitter, same as my Instagram. So I'm trying to diversify my portfolio here in the sports betting space. And I got to tell you, man, it was an hour of my life that I don't want to relive again. And I'm terrified of next Friday when I have to try to do it again. So TikTok, don't recommend, but I guess if you're good at it, knock yourself out.
Yeah, well, fair enough. Well, oddly enough, you can follow us on our YouTube channel for Pickswise, also Wise and Shine. You can subscribe to that and get our daily mails as well. And it's interesting, Mark, we get into so many different things throughout the year. You and Jared and Lauren alike, whether it's the National Football League, whether it's college football, we bleed everything else in between here in the fall season. But at this time of the year with college football, this is when you start to see that trend of the teams that rise to the top and those that bunker down and fall off the map. Now we are in week 6 of college football. What are your biggest takeaways before you get to this first game?
We're starting to see a clear delineating line, I think, with a lot of teams between the non-conference play and the conference play. I think, we've always sort of known that's the case, but, still every year, certain teams get tripped up as soon as they walk into conference play. Just go look at Michigan. Michigan was scoring 51 points a game, and then they go play Maryland, and they struggle with Maryland at home. And then, of course, Iowa's got one of the best defenses in the country, but still, they had only had 13 points till for about 57 minutes of that game. So, I think you start to see a clear line. And as you get into that second and third conference games with a lot of these teams, you have to start to handicap differently. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways I got so far through this season.
I'm almost compelled to go Denver Broncos, Iowa Hawkeyes, parlay under each and every week from here on out. That's for the dreck that we saw on Thursday night. I'm kind of leaning.
The good part about that is, David, is you can make that bet and actually never have to watch the game. Right? Like it is a blind play where you don't have to do anything other than just make the bet and walk away and check your phone probably about 3 hours after you made the bet. And you'll be like, okay, good. We're great. Thanks. But there's literally no reason to watch that football. None. That football is as gross as the Mets were last night. How disgusting are the New York Mets? I can't believe. Go ahead. I'll go on for an hour. I can't believe that showing last night at home. That was gross.
I thought it was perfect. I thought it was picture perfect baseball from the San Diego Padres. They did what America wanted them to do, and that was drub the New York Mets in front of the national audience, embarrass them. I hope they're done when we talk again.
Putting out of their misery. Just gross.
Yes.
Like I don't have. I'm not even a Mets fan. Like I'm a Yankees fan, so I don't care. But from a bet point, on the money line yesterday was my POD with Max Scherzer on the mound, and all of a sudden I was out having dinner and I looked up at the TV. I go, does that say 7-1? Is that 7? Are they losing 7-1 at home in the 5th inning of a baseball game in the play? Oh yeah, they are. They're gross. That's a gross baseball team. Put them out of their misery tonight, please.
Well, we'll see what happens with the San Diego Padres. Now, we segue from what was gross last night. We will not get into, I promise you this, we'll not get into Nevada, Colorado State. I promise you. Now, Colorado State won that game, the first one of the season. They had 2 defensive touchdowns. They won the game 17-14. But we're going to go 5 games today. One of them a premier game on the West Coast that you absolutely loved. And then we'll also dip and dive a little bit into the SEC, and we'll take a peek at the Heisman Trophy race. Something interesting that you and Jared talked about, too, a couple days ago with the National Football League and the league MVP itself, and we'll get into that. But the first game on the docket, Tennessee, they come into this ball game against LSU on the road. There's a couple different trends going in opposite directions. Who do you like and why?
I mean, this line opened at 3.5, right? And it was way short than most people would have expected, which is why the public went to run and back Tennessee. If this game was at night in Death Valley, I'd be hammering LSU. Tennessee
Yes.
got lucky with this 12 o'clock kickoff, a sleepy kickoff for an LSU team that's still trying to figure themselves out. Look, I think Brian Kelly and LSU are going to get a signature win somewhere, right? It's going to end up on their schedule. They're going because he's too good of a coach not to. He's too good of a coach to just sort of sleep through and beat the teams that you're supposed to beat, but lose to everybody else. This is a tough spot for Tennessee. That pass defense is awful. It is bad. Florida was able, and Anthony Richardson was able to throw for 400 yards on that pass defense. Now, I don't know if LSU is the offense and the quarterback to do that, but this game's going to be a lot tighter than people think. I think the number is right on at 3.5. That's what I would have made it as, much tighter than what many people would have expected. Tennessee's got a lot of things on the line, if you will. Obviously, they're trying to stay undefeated. And full disclosure, guys, I got a ticket on Tennessee over 7.5 wins. So part of me really wants them to win this game. I just hate the spot. I really do. I mean, it's a tough place to go into Baton Rouge and win a football game. The number feels about right. It's now down below a field goal at 2.5. I expect the public to push that thing back to 3 before kickoff. If you see another 3.5 pop up, I think it's a buy point LSU. I'm going to watch the game and enjoy it peacefully without a bet on it because there's a lot of angles that would stress me the hell out, especially given what I went through last night with TikTok. So I will enjoy the game as is and hopefully see if Tennessee can pull out a victory.
Now, you mentioned Brian Kelly. I want to get into him real quick, just because of the circumstances and the expectations. He goes from Notre Dame to LSU, and you go into Baton Rouge, and the dynamics change a ton. Obviously, you're going from an independent to the SEC. There are wild animals down there in the South, and you know this quite well. With that being said, how much latitude do you give a guy like Brian Kelly, not only to win now, but to bring them into a perennial powerhouse and you're either 2, 3, or 4?
I think you get a 1-year alibi. I mean, I don't think there's much expected of him as there should be. These aren't his players. He doesn't have a quarterback that he trusts like he did. I mean, listen, Ian Book wasn't great, but he still got drafted into the NFL. And in reality, I mean, you can look at LSU and go, they should be 5-0 right now and a lot better than what they are. They beat Mississippi State and they beat Auburn on the road. I don't get, listen, you go into Jordan Hare and win a football game, that's always tough. If their idiot kicker doesn't miss an extra point in the opener, they might beat Florida State. So is Auburn maybe a little bit, is LSU rather maybe a little bit undervalued? I think there's an argument for that. I wouldn't totally write them off. Jaden Daniels has been okay, but the problem is Jaden Daniels doesn't want to throw the damn football. Like, he wants to run. He's been through 5 games and he's thrown for 915 yards. Last week in a win over Auburn, he only threw for, get this, David, 80 yards. That's 80 more yards than you and I threw for last week. So that's not a big number. So, I mean, they are kind of imploring him to throw the football. If he does it against this Tennessee team, he's going to have success. But I think that's the way they have to win this game. They got to go through the air.
It seems like every week that we get together, it's only been a handful of times, but every week we've gotten together, 2 things happen. You take a deep dive into something else, TikTok last night. And today you have Georgia as a 3-touchdown favorite yet again. They take on Auburn in a game that many people think will be a one-sided tilt. Obviously, conference play is a different dog, and you mentioned that with Michigan earlier against Maryland. Do you see the same fate today with the Bulldogs?
There's only one way I would play this game, and I'm not going to play the game at all. It's a pass for me. But there's only one way I would play this game, and that's Georgia in the first half. Right? The last 2 weeks, Georgia has struggled in the first half, and they haven't covered the game. There's no reason for me to lay 29, 30, whatever it is, in the entire game and hope that they can cover that number. I'll take them in the first half and back them there, because what I believe is the last 2 weeks, if you really look inside the box score and pay attention to the game, Georgia beat themselves. Nobody caught up to Georgia. Georgia played bad football the last 2 weeks and had a ton of mistakes. Part of the reason why they outgained Missouri last week by 200 yards in the game and only won by 4 points, because they made mistakes and they had turnovers. So I still maintain the only team that can beat Georgia is Georgia. I'd play him in the first half. I think Kirby Smart gets these errors fixed. I think he figures out exactly what he needs to do to make sure this team is a little bit sharper. Auburn has tons of issues on the offensive side of the ball. It is a very inept offense, and they're not going to get better anytime soon. Now, Georgia is going to be missing a couple of key players. Jalen Carter's not going to be there on the defensive side. So that may be, I guess, a problem from a pass rush standpoint and a run-stopping standpoint. But they got enough horses in the barn to be able to take care of Auburn. But this game, theoretically, and if this is 14.5, at, for the first half. If they're not up by 17 in the first half, they're not covering this game anyway, right? Like, what's the reason to bet the whole thing? Because theoretically, David, if they are up by 17 and a half, you know what I can do after that cashes? Just double down at halftime and bet the second half for them to cover there, because they will, because that means they're in full control of the game, right? That's the only way to play it. I mean, it's a chance to make double money. You're either going to lose the first half and you're not going to win the game, so there's no reason to back the second half, or they cover the first half and they're going to cover the entire game, which you double down on.
So I guess on that point, though, Mark, you mentioned taking them in the first half. Why not go the opposite way and take the team total under for Auburn?
Well, I mean, listen, there's an argument for that. I don't think you're wrong with the handicap. I think you're spot on with what you're looking at. I just rather there's a part of me that doesn't like to bet on bad teams to be bad, especially when it comes to the SEC, because things can generally be very, very tight. Go back to last year, Alabama-Auburn. It was a 22-point spread going into that game in the Iron Bowl, and Auburn almost won the thing outright. They were bad last year. They had the same problems last year as they have this year. So, I'd rather bet on the good team to be good, because I think there's less variance there, as opposed to the bad team to be bad, because sometimes bad teams can have a good day. Yes, of course, good teams can have a bad day, but I think that happens less often.
Yeah, certainly the case there. In Georgia, nearly a 29-point favorite in this ball game, yielding under 11 points per game. Keep in mind, if you're backing Georgia in this one, the over-under total 49.5. That's a gross number to chase, but you're almost inclined to take Georgia all the way if they're going to cover that thing, and also the over. My favorite game of the day is one that was showcased in the spotlight here because it happens to take place in Pasadena, probably one of the best venues on the West Coast in all of college football, and that's at the Rose Bowl.
Yeah. One of the best venues that nobody shows up to these days, David. One of the best venues nobody bothers to show up.
I know you were going to take a shot at the West Coast, Mark.
It's not a shot. Listen, I hope people are there today. You and I both hope people are there today.
Yes. And the one thing, and it was especially highlighted in the LA Times just last night, is there is a growing trend in attendance for UCLA over the last couple of weeks. So it's a game that we will feature two of the best defenses in the Pac-12 conference for as long as it lasts, but the Utah Utes and the UCLA Bruins. This is a fascinating game on paper, and also one that will be played on the field, Mark, because you have two quarterbacks that are different dynamics, but the ground and pound for both these clubs are identical, and they rank 1 and 2 statistically in defense. I don't know about you, but this gives me a feel of no matter where it stands, whoever has the ball last is going to win it.
That's fine, and I hope it's only by a field goal, because either way, that means I'm catching the ticket. So from that standpoint, I mean, look, this was my write-up. This is one of my 3-star plays on the Pickswise.com website, was UCLA in this spot. And I had this game circled on the calendar, David, all the way back like week 3. It's been circled on my calendar for about a month now, after Utah lost week 1 to Florida, and USC came out hotter than hell, because guess what's on deck for the Utes in their next game?
That's right.
Oh, yeah, it's a look-ahead spot to USC for probably a game that's going to decide who is going to be the number 1 seed in the Pac-12 championship game, and who's actually going to be there when it's all said and done. So, look, Utah is the one team in the Pac-12 that doesn't play like a Pac-12 style. They hit you in the mouth, and they're physical, and they always do it. And a lot of these Pac-12 teams don't know how to respond when they get punched in the mouth. And again, full disclosure, I think Utah's boat raced UCLA the last 5 times these teams has met. A lot of the same coaches, same players. I mean, Dorian Thompson-Robinson for UCLA is like on his 11th year in college. He's basically Van Wilder at this point, as far as starting for the Bruins. But this is also, a UCLA team that is much better than expected. And when I circled this game on the calendar, David, I thought this was going to be about a 7.5 point number, and I was going to be really happy. It's a lot shorter than what I'd hoped for. Why? Because the Bruins are really good. They're scoring 41 points a game while allowing just 20. And as you mentioned, 6th best run defense in the nation. I'll back UCLA here because Dorian Thompson-Robinson is completing nearly 75% of his passes. He's done it with his arms and his legs. This is a UCLA team that converts 57% on 3rd down. They're really tough to get off on the field, to get off the field. And I think that's a spot where Utah today is going to struggle. The Bruins offense, has over 500 yards per game. They're a 200 club. 200 yards passing, 200 yards rushing. And that really is a key stat when it comes to college football. They're 4-1 ATS in their last 5 games as a home dog. I think Chip Kelly gets a big-time win here this week and upsets the Utah Utes.
I'm fascinated by the ground game for both these clubs. Like Jacques Charbonnet, he goes from Michigan to UCLA. I thought personally he was just coming home because he lost confidence in his game, but averaging almost 6.5 yards a pop for the UCLA Bruins. That is a triple threat in the backfield. You mentioned DTR, what he does with his arms, but also legs, the read option, the RPO, that game. Tavion Thomas on the other end of things, I mean, he was lights out the tail end of last season. It doesn't look like he's missed a beat, but you got to imagine with UCLA, they're going to sell out for him.
I would think they would against, this defense. But again, you're running into the teeth of what UCLA does well. But I'll say this much. Tavion Thomas in that run game does not look like it did last year. He's only averaging 4.4 yards a carry. Well, in the NFL, that's great. In college, that's a fairly low number, all things considered, when a lot of the big-time running backs are in the 5s or the 6s where they are. So there's something not right with the Utah running game. And look, I was somebody who was pumping Cam Rising at the beginning of this year, thinking he might be a sneaky Heisman candidate. He's been good. He just hasn't been what I thought he was going to be, where he's carrying this team through stretches. Like last week, in their win over Oregon State, Utah was outgained by the Beavers, and they gave up more first downs, and they benefited from 4 Oregon State turnovers, including a pick 6, which is why that game is so lopsided. I don't think they get that advantage this week. Again, turnovers aren't predictive, so I wouldn't sit there and presume that they're going to get 4 turnovers once again. And that's the reason why a lot of people are down on USC, because they get a ton of turnovers. And it's like, well, you can't expect that every single week. They've been benefiting from it and taking advantage, but same thing for Utah here. I don't know they'll have the luxury of 4 turnovers this week against UCLA.
One interesting note, Bo Calvert, the linebacker for UCLA, he's playing against his brothers today, Josh and Ethan. So watch out for that. But those guys might not be on the field at all. We pivot from the Pac-12.
Brothers kind of hug. Brothers don't shake hands.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. This game loses a little bit of spice to it, but it'll be a questionable mark on who gets it done and when. Red River, Texas and Oklahoma. The players have changed. The head coaches, the personnel have changed. Steve Sarkisian comes in. Lincoln Riley is obviously out. Does this lose any luster for you at all?
Yeah, because neither one of these teams are as good as we thought they were going to be at this point in time. I mean, after Texas had put Alabama on the ropes, I think we all thought that they were going to be a much better team than what they were. Turns out Steve Sarkisian is still a really bad game manager as a head coach. He was that way at USC. He was a bad game manager on the offensive side of the football in the NFL, and it trends the same way here for Texas. Now, again, it looks like, excuse me, I'm just, spanning the interwebs here, that Quinn Ewers is going to start today. I don't know if that's 100%. I'm seeing some people saying that Quinn Ewers is going to start today. That is a huge lift for Texas offensively. But still, I mean, objectively, David, should Texas be laying 8 points to anybody right now? I think the answer is no. When they're the underdog at home, I think you can say that's a good bet. But when you're in a neutral site against your rival in a game that, kind of expected a lot more with a quarterback who might not be 100%, they shouldn't be laying 8 points here. And I don't think it matters if Dylan Gabriel is starting for Oklahoma at this point. They can still score, but this is just way too many points for me to lay with the Longhorns here. I would back Oklahoma. Again, it's a stay-away game for me. There's a lot of variance I can't eliminate, at least for me. But I just don't think Texas should be laying 8 points to anybody at this point.
Yeah, so if Gabriel doesn't go, Davis Beville will be the starting quarterback. But also another note, Eric Gray, who's the regular starting running back for Oklahoma, you don't know if he's going to get his backup there. Marcus Major. Major did not play last week. He had some ankle issues and then was ruled out of that affair. Push back a little bit here because you talk about giving points when you're Texas. We heard through weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4 going into it that Oklahoma's defense was better than before. You lose Lincoln Riley and you get tougher. They were making plays, no big blown coverages, no chunk plays, and then all of a sudden they've gotten beaten pillar to post. So if you are going to take Texas, I would say this in the response is that Oklahoma's defense has been lagging quite a bit. It doesn't matter how good their offense has been. I mean, they've been dragging ass for all intents and purposes over the last couple of weeks. You can't disagree with me on that.
No, look, they're the only thing Lincoln Riley left in Norman, Oklahoma was his defense. He took everything else that was good and left the thing that was bad. So good for him. Bad for
Yeah.
Oklahoma. They
Yeah.
just, they're not in a conference where nobody is physical. If Oklahoma chose to be physical on the defensive side of the ball, they'd be a lot better off. It just, again, I'm with you. I understand. And is the possibility of a one-sided blowout for either team out there? Yeah, because both these defenses aren't great. Yeah, I don't know what happened to the Texas defense that showed up against Alabama. I really,
Yeah.
if they had that defense every week, they'd be leading this conference by a considerable margin, and it wouldn't matter who was at quarterback. But that defense hasn't showed up since the Bama game, and I don't know that you can expect that they will on either side today.
The silver lining with all this, though, Mark, is the one thing we will not have to hear about again throughout the rest of the 2022. Texas is back. We don't have to hear about that anymore. We talked 2 weeks ago about Clemson, and I asked you a pointed question about the Heisman Trophy race with Bryce Young and a couple other dudes. But one of those guys in particular, DJ Uiagalelei, would he have a breakout game sooner or later? Oddly enough, as soon as we talked about him, he throws for 5 touchdowns in that game against Wake Forest. Today, a game against Boston College, chalk for them, but they're on the road. Nearly a 3-touchdown favorite in this affair. Do you go anywhere near it?
No. And the thing is, too, what bothered me about that game against Wake wasn't so much the fact that Wake scored. It was that Wake scored 45. Keep a Wake offense in the 30s, you're like, I got it. That's good. I'll take that as a win.
Yeah.
But when they got to 40 and tied that thing up at 45, it's like, whoa, are there problems? Is this Clemson defense not as good as I thought it was going to be? And in certain cases, it feels like that's the case. So I have a little bit of hesitancy to back Clemson on the road here. And again, they also have themselves, there might be a little bit of a letdown after beating NC State last week at home. That's the other thing. That was a revenge game from last year as they lost to NC State. So this is a lesser opponent. It feels like a spot where Clemson might not bring their A game traveling up to Chestnut Hill and just might lay one down here a little bit. They're going to win the game, but it might be closer than you think.
With that being said, are there any angles? Because you talked about Georgia earlier and how they can start games and maybe not necessarily finish them. If you're having a team that you look in the back that's a favorite on the road, nearly a 3-touchdown favorite, would you be more inclined to take them in a first half or see how it plays out and then possibly work with some second half action?
I mean, that angle for this game, I don't know that it necessarily, I don't know I look at it the same because I haven't seen, I give more credit to Wake for their performance than I do take away from Clemson in that game. Clemson played a really good game last week against a good team with a great defense and was able to get out of there with a win and a cover. I would look at the whole game in this one. They should be able to dominate the pace. They might not be up by 14 at half. They may only be up by 10 and then sort of just slowly slog away to a cover in the second half. I would use all 4 quarters with the Clemson team. Again, and it's more about the opponent than anything else, right? It's more about the fact that BC just struggles offensively. And we haven't seen Georgia in the last 2 weeks not make mistakes. Georgia has to clean it up here. All Clemson has to do is kind of not lay down for a lesser opponent. And I think sometimes that's a little bit easier.
Going to the SEC now, cash, trash, and play. There's a few teams that are obviously on the radar. A bunch of them are obviously ranked in the top 25. But if we go down the column now, cash, trash, and play, who are you looking at to cash?
I mean, you have to cash Georgia, right? I mean, I still think they're the best team in the SEC. As I said earlier, I don't think anybody's going to beat Georgia other than Georgia. It's not like they're going to step into a situation against Alabama where if they play a clean football game and don't make mistakes and don't have critical drops and don't fumble punts and don't turn the ball over, they're going to beat Alabama straight up. There's no mental edge left for Alabama after what Georgia did to them in the national championship game. And the way the offense is playing, at least from a passing standpoint with Stetson Bennett, you look at it and you go,